Hi, this is Brian from iWire, and today we're going to show you how to install our fuel pump controller hardwire kit. What makes our kit different is that we retain the fuel pump controller in place so you get that low, medium, and high for good tuning and good fuel pressures, but also upgrade all the other components so that fuel pump controller does not fail and you never have any issues. First step, we're going to open the box and show you what's inside. So in every kit, you're going to get your first key components here. Battery cable. This is designed for 1 or 2 pumps, so that's why it's such a large gauge. Small cable to go with circuit breaker. This is to protect the battery from the car as the harness runs along the side of the car. So if you don't have a circuit breaker in there, then yes, you're protecting the fuel pump if you have a fuel pump fuse in the back. But if you, let's say, are doing a seat install and screw up and smush the cable and arc it, this circuit breaker is going to protect that cable from the battery. So that's why there's 2 fuses in our system. The next part is the key sort of feature here, which is the fuse module relay. Main harness cabling for plug and playness. Hardwire kit, all the little odds and ends to finish it out. And then this kit's going to include the stud bypass kit. We'd include this for every kit. We recommend it. The reason is that the leading cause of fuel pump controller failure is when power shorts to ground. The most common reason power shorts to ground, the stock connector on the hanger is not designed for the upgraded current flow when you upgrade your pump. This will bypass that and eliminate that as a source of a problem. We even see this failure on stock fuel pumps if you're running low on fuel. So big thing here is that stud bypass kit. We'll talk about more about this later, as well as show you how to install it. So we're going to install this on Tay's 2012 STI. This is pretty much what it's going to look like for just about any car. This also includes the 02 to 07 models. Basically, this kit will fit any EJ turbo platform. It doesn't fit the FA platforms because the direct injected models use a different style fuel pump controller. And if you want pictures and more help, we have a full install guide online with everything you could need. Well, now the next step is going to be install the kit. Stay tuned for the end of the video. We'll also answer a lot of common questions. So first step, which we have already done since we've kind of taken this car apart a little bit, disconnect the battery. Please disconnect the battery before you do any of this. A lot of this ties into the actual battery power. So if you have it connected and you haven't disconnected it, it's a good way to short it out and hurt yourself or hurt the car. So the first step is to run the main battery cable from the front to the back. This kit that we're doing now is for the single pump kit, but if you have the secondary pump with the radium, you'll see this little connector here. This is for your pressure switch. Now would be a good time to do this at the same because they're going to run in parallel together. So do that now. So the first step is to remove a couple trim pieces. Depending on your model and year, might be slightly different, but the process is the same.
Let's see if Tay's ever taken these out. They feel pretty solid.
So there should be a little push button that you just kind of slide out, and then this piece just pops right out. Today's car is pretty low, so we're just going to jack it up just a little bit. It helps because we're going to pull the cable through here on the fender. The part will come out pretty easily. You just need a little gap so you can slide it through. All right, so the side with the fiberglass sleeve, this is the super strong, both in abrasion but temperature side, is going to go through into the engine bay. There's a little grommet pretty far up there on the side that you just need to get a little hole in, and this will pop right through. I'm going to use this tool. It's a pass-through tool. But it's nice because it's just a kind of sharp edge, but anything that's like this or a box cutter would work fine. All right, so I popped it out enough that I can get the cable here. Now it's just to pull. On most cars, Tay has some fender rolling, so there's a little bit of a gap in the fender liner. So most of the time, and you'll see it on our full install guide, you'll need to kind of take out a couple of the clips down here to lower the fender liner enough to get in there. But in this case, I didn't have to because the clips are already kind of gone. And then all you gotta do is pop out up here. Tay also has a small lightweight battery, so it's gonna kind of come down this way, but you're not gonna hook up the battery now anyway. So just make sure you have enough slack in the engine bay that you're comfortable, but you're not gonna put any of this stuff away until we're all done anyway. So just make sure that you've got plenty. There will be a little excess in the back, so if you need to pull a little more later, that's fine, but we're just gonna get the cable from front to back in there, and then we can go tighten it up later. Now it's time to work the cable to the back. Now would be a good time to kind of push the seat forward, because we're gonna have to pop up this pillar to slide the cable from down here through. Once again, we're not going to put all these trim panels in until we're done, because we're going to have to do a little lining and zip tying in the fender well, and then setting everything up in the back as well. In order to get this trim piece out to lift this trim piece, the seat's got to come up and out, but it's got to do that anyway. So they're just clips. All right, to get the bottom of the back seat out, there's a little loop that you just pull. We'll show you when it comes out. There it goes.
Here it is. Nice to have a friend for this part.
Yes. So this is where it's stuck. That is what you need to pull. There we go. This trim piece is pretty tricky to get off without breaking it, but it does require some force. I started down in this corner and kind of worked my way up, and then was able to get it to come free. And then up here, can't really see them. I'll show you after it's out. There's a cross tab. There we go. That kind of holds it. There's a hook up here. Up here. There's a hook that grabs it. So you got to get it down first, and then you can take it out. Now it's free. We can come down here. You could even go behind this. So basically we're just trying to stay behind and down so that it tucks into the seam in between the plastic trim and the frame and the door jamb. And that can cut across so that we can go back in the other corner. Sedans are going to be a lot easier. You'll just take the carpet out, undo the side trim piece, and you'll have access to it. Pretty much that's it. Wagons are a little more complicated, so we're going to show you how to do the wagon, plus the install guide has step-by-step pictures. So to get to where the fuel pump controller is, which is behind this, we've taken out the trunk liner, the little foam holder here, take out this trim piece, then we're going to take out this trim piece, and then we'll have access to it. So this little clip's kind of tricky. Something very tiny to get in between to get it started will be your best bet. Worry about undoing the seatbelt part of this. We just need it out of the way, and then we can get this piece up. There's a rod that holds the rotation for the back seat that comes across through this plastic piece. You certainly could go through the extra steps of taking the back seat out to get it out, but you really don't need to. This is more than enough to get back there and get what you need. So now we've gotten back to the goods. Fuel pump controller is up there, and we'll install the rest of the kit. So this is the fuse relay module. It's always a good time to double check there's a fuse in here. There should be a fuse, but every once in a while we goof up. If you have a radium 2 pump, now would be a good time to add the secondary fuse that comes in your fuel tank jumper bag. Put that in there, close the lid, and you're good to go. Now we'll install it. So we include this basic bracketry. Gives you lots of options for mounting. We're actually going to use this lower hole down here. When we mount it, we're going to mount it to the outside like this, because this vent is in the way. But if you find somewhere better, by all means, as long as it reaches. There you go. Bolts tightened, nice and secure. Now we can run the rest of the cabling. Now we've run the red power cable across. We're gonna just slide it in this little gap here. Pick it up on the other side in a second. But as long as it feeds through there and doesn't pinch on anything, you're okay. And as with the front, we're going to get it run to the back, and then we'll tighten everything up once we get everything installed. So inside the hardware kit, you'll see this red boot. One of the most common mistakes we see on install is not installing the red boot. Really important. Not likely anything's going to touch there, but that's exposed battery cable. So we need the boot to make sure there's no exposed metal that could accidentally touch something. So the nut that holds that is a 13 millimeter. Loosen it up. Ew, it's got spider webs in here. Ew. Ew.
Are those sunflower seeds? Ew.
Ew.
Ew, Tay. Ew.
Ew.
No, they're sunflower seeds. How does it get back there?
Hey, what are you doing back here?
Gross.
Please slide the boot over. So here's the main jumper, kind of the secret sauce here. So this will plug into the original fuel pump controller. This will plug into the original harness. These two will plug into the module. This one will eventually go to your fuel pump. And this harness is for the add a fuse. And we've got a ground wire that will show you how to do that too. So the first step would be to unplug the harness from the factory fuel pump controller. Hopefully it comes out nicely. There we go.
Use the lock.
Oh, and one other note, this orange wire is to tie into the second pump kit if you have a radium 2 pump. So for now, we'll do nothing with it. This big black one will go in the top. Make sure that's fully seated. And then the smaller one will go down here. Nice and seated on both. And then the last step will be to run this in the direction that the red cable came from. If you had the 2 pump kit, your black wire to the pressure switch would also be part of this group. Pull this down here, just leave some slack. We'll deal with that again later. Next, we're going to talk about the ground wire. This is really important we get this right because the grounding for your fuel pump runs through this wire. We've shortened the circuit and increased the gauge so you get more power out of your pump. But in order to make sure that that's right, this must be grounded well. So our suggestion, depends on your car, would be to take this bolt out. And then we're actually going to sand the paint off of it. Now, bolts tend to get their grounds from the threads, but we want to make sure that where this touches is touching bare metal around it. So we're going to sand it to make sure. Safety first. As we like to say, a clean ground is a good ground. Now that we have the stock one out, we're going to set up for the bypass. Pretty straightforward install. Really, the trick is going to be the location of the studs. There's a couple little tricks there because you got to be worried about what's inside the hanger, but also what is in the car because there's that cross brace that you guys took out to pull out the pump. So we got to make sure we avoid those things and make sure they don't touch, and make sure we get the order of operations of the parts in there so that it seals and conducts. So we should probably explain as to why you need the stud bypass kit. The biggest reason is the stock connector. So if you look here, stock connector is basic small terminals. The gauge is not that large, and then it goes from a connector to a connector. So each time you go through connector is a resistance point. And if you look at the way that the stock connector is set up, it's actually a 90-degree turn. It'd be like kinking a hose. Electrical current doesn't like any of these things. So what ends up happening even on factory setups is if you run low on fuel and the pump gets hot, these connectors will burn out. So if you're going to upgrade your pump, now you have even more concern about that because now you're pushing past what the original terminals were even designed for. So the stud bypass kit fixes that. And as we mentioned before, one of the biggest reasons for fuel pump controller failure is when this burns out, generally power and ground's short, and that fries your controller. So this allows you to use a stock controller for a much larger size pump than we would have thought originally. So before we install it, we want to make sure there's not going to be anything in the way on the top or the bottom. So we brought the cover piece here just to kind of get you a sense of it. There we go. Hey, there's a little lock thing. So you want to make sure that you are, the general recommendation for stock hanger is going to be in this vicinity here and this vicinity here. You can see underneath that there's openings in the grooves. So in the webbing here, you got to make sure that you don't hit one of these bars because there's got to be room for it. But the other thing that you've got to watch out for on some aftermarket hangers like this one is when you install it, you'll see that it's going to sit pretty close. So as long as it doesn't hit this main piece, you'll be okay. So for the most part, our recommended guide of putting it in the spots we'll show you should work, but always, always, always check your application first just to make sure, because the last thing you want is those studs to touch something like this metal and short out.
Okay, now that we know what hanger we're going to work with, what our kit's going to be, and we know where everything's going to fit, we're going to mark where we're going to drill the holes for the bypass. So we are going to drill right here and right here. Now keep in mind, you want to make sure that there's plenty of room to where you can tighten it down and it's not going to touch, and be secure.
So the other reason we mark the hole is because you can verify on the other side. It's gonna really kick them off. Okay. Now we have that there. You can see that it's not gonna notch into that.
Yeah.
And we've got some room, kind of just double check. And you can even see I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but if you look at it through the light, you can actually see where those marks are. It's thin enough. So with the kit, you're gonna get a couple pieces and we'll show you the order that they go in. So the stud kit, basically in first is gonna be the insulator, because on the older metal hangers, you don't want the metal of the stud touching the metal of the hanger. So this insulator goes first on both of them, and then you'll insert the stud, but in between the two is this black washer. The washer acts as a gasket between the bottom of the stud and the top of the hanger. You'll see a black washer here. Same thing applies at the bottom. The stud is going to, this is going to act as an insulator to seal it between the nut and the bottom of the hanger. And then you'll have a secondary nut that will lock the ring terminal to the other part, and then they can conduct through each other and through the rings of the stud. And then on the top, same thing applies. You have a nut that'll sandwich between the stud and the ring terminal. And then on top is this little acorn nut. This is actually non-insulated, so that if it touches something above the top of the hanger, it's not gonna arc because this won't conduct electricity. So now I'll show you how to install it. So the metal hanger, same thing applies. They tend to be a little better about the corrosion problem, but at the same time, we've seen it happen on those hangers too. So if you're upgrading your pump, we really recommend a stud bypass kit. The other option is a radium hanger. Radium hanger comes with a very similar setup, so it eliminates that problem as well. So we'll get to this later, but worth mentioning now, these have a little ground wire, and we're gonna splice this back in later, but on the older hangers, they don't have it, so you'll just cut it short and then you can ignore it.
Now that we've marked where we're going to put our stud bypass, we're going to drill a pilot hole into the top of the hanger, and then the final drill will be a 15/64 through the top. That will allow enough clearance for the insulator.
And make sure it's a 15/64.
Yes.
You don't want that to
super
leak.
important. Okay.
Drill it out.
Now that we've drilled our pilot holes and we like where they're located, we're going to drill the final hole, the 15/64 inch drill hole bit.
That Lance.
Oh, don't lose the part.
Now that we have the holes drilled, let's insert the insulators. We actually include 4 of these in each kit, just in case you mess up, because this is the only part that is non-reusable. It will crush. And then make sure we have our insulator washer in between, because if this washer goes on top, the ring terminal won't make good contact and you won't get any current running from the top to the bottom. So very important. And then on the bottom side, same thing, washer and then nut. Okay, now I've got it started. Same thing on the other one. They're lock washers, so you want the lock on the bottom side so it threads a few threads first. Then from here, we're gonna sandwich it down. Now they have them installed, we're going to tighten them up. This isn't a drill kind of thing. This is a by hand, careful kind of thing. Okay, so there's one, nice and compressed. Much like when Lance was talking about the fuel tank hanger, the appropriate tool will help you get the correct torque. This isn't kill it, but it needs to be snug. Remember, you're dealing with plastic and aluminum. Nothing too crazy.
Snug.
Snug. Not gorilla and not finger tight.
All right, now that we've got the pump snapped in to the basket, before we reassemble it, we need to put in the wire, and Brian's gonna show you how that's done.
So the order should match the factory pump. We changed the colors around a little bit, but for reference, the blue wire is the ground, you can see because of this, and the white wire is the power source. And so we're gonna tie this back into the original harness so that this little ground stays in play. So we're just gonna cut it. You don't need this anymore. There will be an opening for that part there, but that's okay. So you don't need this anymore. Yeah. All right, and then with the supplied kit, you get, this is the one spot you're gonna have to crimp. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about it. We do apologize. I still think it's considered plug and play from here. So we're gonna trim it just a little bit, not a lot, because there'll be excess and that's okay. Slide your shrink tube over. Any sort of basic stripper will handle the job. And then it's just a basic crimp. If you want to see more about crimping, we have some YouTube videos with more instruction on how to do these kinds of things.
The insulator. Okay. Sorry.
Question my torta. And then we'll shrink it.
Because this is a fuel pump, there is going to be residue of fuel. So hair dryer, heat gun,
Not lighter.
not a lighter,
Not a lighter.
nothing, no open flame,
Yeah.
and try to do this away from the vehicle and fumes as possible.
Yeah, well ventilated area. This is just good shrink tube. It won't get eaten by E85 or gasoline. Don't use any sort of like glue shrink or something like that, because that will get eaten by the fuel. So this is fuel safe. All right, so as far as installing these, the stud order doesn't particularly matter left to right, as long as you match your colors top to bottom. So if you install it one way, probably best to make a little note on the top of the hanger as to which side that you picked. We're gonna go, blue is the official, L is for blue in Subaru world, but you could write B. And then W for white. But you know what, I'm gonna change it just for funs, because now it's Brian and Whitney.
Oh, that's so nice.
See what I did there? Once this gets put together, it's actually going to kind of twist and compress. So anywhere you put it is kind of fine. But obviously this is the outer edge of the assembly, so it's going to have to sit something like this. And then I'll tighten it. So these will just sit kind of tucked inside, and we'll tighten them up. Both nice and tight. Like I said, when this goes in, it's going to kind of twist in and then lock into the hanger as it goes. And one thing to note, don't cut these short. If you are installing this, just leave it really long. It can loop, it's fine. Or you can do this wire at the end. So if you have a metal hanger, you won't have this. So you can just trim it. I'm not going to trim it, but snip. You can just trim it really close to the end, and the little exposed ground is not going to hurt anything. If you happen to get a Walbro 450 pump for this kit, will absolutely work. It's plug and play, but your in-tank harness will look slightly different. It's going to come with open terminals. Depends on the pump as to which side is power and ground. So we leave that to you once you've sorted out which one is power and ground on your pump to insert the connector in each spot to match it up. Remember, the blue and black is ground, the white is the power side. Just lock in the connector in the appropriate order and then add the lock tab. And all else is exactly the same. And that's it. And now I'll let Lance reinstall the basket.
Now, as rule of thumb, you want to make sure that everything sits within this parameter because it's going to move. You don't want it to bind or pinch or kink, so you want to make sure that everything, you know, is clear of itself. Now that we have it assembled, we want to make sure that that the studs do not get in the way of any of our mounting brackets. Now, this bracket only fits one way, so you'll make sure everything's clear, there's no obstructions, you're good to go, and you're ready to put it back in.
So Lance has got it installed for us. Definitely take your time here. It's not worth messing up all the hard work you've done up to this point to rush here. So we'll connect up what is now just the fuel level and fuel temp, depending on your car. Some of the cars are only fuel level and they don't have fuel temp anymore. And then, good thing we noted blue and white
For Brian and Whitney.
because we're gonna pop these through the hole. The trick here is kind of like up front, where you just want to pop a little hole so that we can get from the upper to the lower part without allowing for, we want to make sure this is still sealed. This is open to the bottom of the car technically, even though the gas tank's in the way. So we don't want to make a big hole here, just as small as we can get away with. there's one, and there's two. The other thing to note here is that if you have the older gas tank, like 93 to 07, or yeah, 93 to 07, mostly 02 to 07, you'll have to route the wiring kind of under the car and out around. Check our install guide. We have step-by-step on how to do that. So a little bit different there if you don't have the newer style gas tank on the 08 and ups. All right, and then our blue can go here. And this is where those insulated nuts come into play. And these are pretty much hand tight, maybe just a little tighter than that. Definitely do not over tighten them, you will break them. Same 8mm socket you use to tighten the hanger will be here, but this one is just snug, just beyond finger tight. And now they're locked in. Now I can get this back up here. Make sure the gasket kind of goes back into play. As you are putting this back together, you want to make sure that you don't pinch the wires that are coming through here. So be very careful about how you route these. So we want them routed this direction because there's more space up here. You can loop back in there. Excess is fine, no big deal. Definitely don't try to make it really tight. Allow them to kind of coil up in there. That's totally fine. You're gonna have tons of slack with this plug. So no worries there. And then now that we have it on there.
Oh, fake tightening.
Oh, and then tighten. Hand tight, but a little bit more, just snug, nothing crazy. Perfect. All right. Okay. Make sure the colors match up. White to white, blue to blue. This plug can just hang out under here. Nothing crazy needs to happen. We'll clean it up at the end. All right. The next step will be to get our red wire up to the front so we can hook it up to the Adafuse. From there, we'll do a quick test and then button everything up. Same thing here as the other parts. We're just gonna run it in its general spot, and then once we clean it all up, then we can tighten everything down. Just gonna run it for now. So it'll run the same loop as the battery cable. You kind of squeeze it to get some of the coil out of it. So once we kind of got a guess as to how long it's going to be, we can trim it. So I trim about that much out, but it would depend on your car and depending on your routing. In the future kits, you will see that this is already done. You won't have to worry about it, but even an older kit, we're showing you how to do it just in case. So strip the wire, put the end on it. One size smaller, looks like. There we go. Crimp the end on it, not coming off with basic tension. Just keep going. And then we're gonna open up the fuse panel so we can see in there. And then we're gonna take the Adafuse and we're gonna add it to the correct fuse. We'll pop up on the screen the actual fuse that you need. So we'll take the Adafuse and stick it in here. This is just to trigger the fuel pump relay in the module in the back. It's not doing any work of the fuel pump. That's why it's small gauge wire and tying into a key on fuse. If it's tied into a constant fuse, your relay is going to be on all the time. If you tied it into an accessory fuse, it's going to turn off while you crank it. So we're gonna make sure we stick it so there are 2 fuses in here. We preload one of them, but you're gonna sneak the other fuse in the other slot. If there are not 2 fuses in here, this won't work. So the last step is just to hook that up, and then we'll tie it, make sure it stays up and out of the way, and that's it. So now that we got all of the basic pieces in place, got to test it. So next step will be to hook up the circuit breaker to the battery. Now you'll see on this aftermarket setup, they are nice enough to put in a hole set for our circuit breaker. If you have a stock battery, works just fine. You can actually use the J-hook stud. And if you want to see pictures on how we did that, just check the install guide. We have pictures of that too. This is our general guide. The install guide on the website has a whole kind of odds and ends for different setups. So I'll show you how to do this. So a couple ways you can do this depending on your battery setup. You can use this top part, top stud, or you could use the side. Either one would work. I'm gonna try this way because I think this will come out nice. I'm not gonna hook it up to the battery yet. We're not quite ready. And then if you look closely with the boot disconnected, you'll see that one says BAT, which is the copper one, and one says AUX, which is the silver one. The copper one is going to go to the battery positive side. Make sure your boot's on there. I need to get that off. So these are 10mm nuts. So let's loosen those guys up. And then slip that through there. And this is tightness wise snug, but not crazy. And then when you're ready to hook up the battery, put it there. Like that. We'll probably trim a little hole right there so it fits nicely. And on the other side, we'll go direct to your main cable going to the back of the car. We're going to disconnect this because we don't want it there yet. Just snug. And then you can put the top of the boot to protect the cables. Double check to see if you like how the cables run through. And the next step will be to do some basic testing, make sure everything works, functions how it should. We'll run through a little bit of troubleshooting, and then we'll show you a quick how we put it back together and made it look nice. Now that we've finished the main install, let's test it before we put everything back together. First thing we're going to do is cycle the key. You should hear the fuel pump prime and then stop.
Do it one more time. Cool.
So if you turn the key and you don't hear the fuel pump prime, first couple things that we suggest to check would be location of the add-a-fuse and making sure there are 2 fuses in there. You got to remember when you pull the fuse that you got to put the one you pull into the add-a-fuse. The other thing is to make sure that the fuse in the back is installed in the black module, and the ground is securely fastened, and that the connectors, especially if you're doing the stud bypass kit, everything's secured tight. The metal of the ring is touching the metal of the stud, and the washer isn't in the way. Beyond that, there really shouldn't be any issues as long as your circuit breaker is connected solidly. And if you had any other issues, just let us know and we'll walk you through it. Now that it's fired up and everything is good to go, time to put it back together. We're going to show you quickly how to reinstall because it's the opposite of removal. So one thing to make sure that you do is the main battery cable needs to be zip tied to the harness that's running along the fender. Take a look at the install guide. We have some pictures of this as well, but just want to make sure that that cable is not bouncing around or doesn't fall down and rub on your tire if the fender liner fails or something happens with that. So first step is just to make sure that your cabling from engine bay to cabin is in the place that you want it, and then we can zip tie through here. Now we're just gonna tighten up in here. Make sure there's enough slack down by the dead pedal so they can tuck in and away. And then once the cover is gonna go on, that will keep it out. I'm gonna zip tie these actually together so that this cable comes back this way and loops that way and tucks away. And then we'll put the covers on once this route's with it.
Oh no. Oh geez.
Crap.
Tay, you might need to come look at this. Sorry, man. It's all installed. Sorry, we had to do that. Sorry.
It's amazing. Alright, so the last step is just to make it pretty, but the biggest thing is you just want to make sure it's routed where it's not going to get pinched by the seat. The seat's mostly just foam under here, so making sure that you avoid the clips and anything like that is going to be your priority here. But outside of that, there's not too much to worry about. You can see the factory harness kind of just lays on top as well, so nothing too big a deal. Just make sure nothing like a seat bolt or a bracket pinches it. Other than that, you should be good to go. And that concludes our hardwire install guide. Stay tuned for a bit more information about the hardwire kit. The next step is to hand Tay the keys. But first, he needs to call his local tuner to get his updated map so he can go drive it. You have fuel pressure. Now Lance has done all the hard work and gotten the fuel pumps out, or fuel pump out. We like to talk about the different types of fuel pumps. So this is your stock one. This is AM340. This is probably going to be your most common pump upgrade for majority of applications. If you need more fuel than that, there's a Walbro 450. I think it's also commonly known as a 45, depending on the type. There's also 525. We generally don't recommend 525. There's a whole bunch on that. Mostly has to do with the fact that it tends to destroy fuel pump controllers, and it seems to have some internal faults that cause that. We have a blog post on that, so definitely check that out for a whole detail on 525s, fuel pump controllers, and all the stuff relating to that. Outside of that, if you need more than 450 liters per hour, we generally recommend 2 pumps, either 2 340s or 2 450s, depends on your application. Radium makes an amazing hanger for that, and we also have a plug and play kit for that. The install would be the exact same as this. There's just a slight tweak to it because you're adding the secondary pump, of which on our install guides on the website has all the details for that.
One of the analogies that Brian often talks about when he's talking about pumps, it's like when you're trying to push a car, it's stalled. If you have 2 people pushing a car, it's a lot easier than 1 big person pushing a car. So what we like to suggest, especially with the higher horsepower vehicles, is using a dual pump system. That way you're not straining 1 pump working hard, you're getting 2 of them to work, comfortably.
I would say the last piece about the 2 pump is that with 525, remember that every time you start the car, the ECU requests 100% fuel for about 15 seconds, and it's really hard for the ECU to compensate for that much fuel, especially when you have 450 and 525. Now, if you want to run a 525, there's even more fuel in that scenario. But if you ran 2 340s in a hanger, the primary pump will be running at full blast, not 2, because the secondary pump will be based on a manifold pressure switch. So it would only come on when you hit 10 pounds of boost, or depending on what your tuner's setting up for. So you don't have those high fuel pressure issues when you don't need the fuel. So I figured now would be a good time to talk about fuel pump controllers. Here's the OEM one that you'll find on any EJ powered turbo Subaru. This one is an upgraded pump from another car. The biggest difference you obviously see is size. Now, what does a fuel pump controller do? It's a gigantic heat sink. All it does is create resistance on the ground side of the wire. When you create resistance, you generate heat. So all of these fins are surface area to get heat away from the little microcontroller that's going on here. There's really not a lot of complexity in these things, but they do generate a lot of heat. So originally we thought that this was failing, the stock one was failing, because the fuel pump controllers weren't able to wick heat fast enough. We did a ton of research and testing. We can get these things up to 250 degrees for hours on end, they're fine. So after all the testing we did, we really found that the root cause of fuel pump controller failure is power shorting to ground. The only way we could kill it was that. When that happens, that's usually because either the power wire touches the ground wire, which is why we use the stud bypass kit. The stock connector is not designed to handle that. So it gets hot, melts, and they touch. And occasionally we see it in terms of the pump itself. If you run low on fuel, your pump can get hot. It internally shorts, which shorts the controller as well as a byproduct of that. Now, when we talk about fuel pump size, we say recommended to 450. The reason that we don't include 525s with the stock controller is that the 525s just seem to be notorious for killing fuel pump controllers no matter what we do. We found better success with the upgraded controller, but we still can't confirm 100% this is the fix for that problem. So what we generally recommend for fuel pump choice is a 340, a 450. If you need 525 liters per hour, that's your choice. That is where you should switch to 2 pumps instead of 1, because the lifting action of 2 smaller pumps is a lot easier on the electrical system than trying to push 1 big pump. So at that point you can go 2 340s or 2 450s, which for almost every application would be plenty of fuel. Obviously there's some guys that are running ridiculous amounts of fuel, in which case then we talk about other alternatives. But the biggest thing to note is for basically every application, your stock fuel pump controller is fine. If you are running a 525, then you might consider this, but we'd probably suggest that you switch your fuel choice, your fuel pump choice first, and this is a last resort. Newtoners. It's in big newtons.
fig Newtons.
You guys, I have to use the audio. You can't talk the whole time.
35 fig Newtons.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Now that we have... fuck. Sorry, hold on.
Outtakes. Okay, hold on.
Yeah. So the next step is to put the hole in it.
Pilot
All right,
hole.
mechanical guy.
Don't drill into the wood.
Drill into the wood.
Okay.
Drill straight into my hand.
Okay, so
I'll put my
what
hand on
size? What size is
So
this?
this is
Now that we've marked.
All right.
Menard.
Take a breath. Take a breath.
I haven't gotten a yeet
All right.
today. No, this is good now. Now we're having fun.